Hello and welcome to another episode of Miles to Go. I'm your host, Miles O'Brien. I'm a science reporter for PBS, and as a result, I do cover a wide range of topics and speak to a lot of interesting people all over the scientific map, so to speak. I'd say the three big buckets are innovation, exploration, and human resilience. This episode touches on all those bases. I'm sharing a conversation I had in September of 2023 with Jared Isaacman. The National Business Aviation Association asked me to do a profile of him as they were giving him their Meritorious Service Award. I didn't know much about Isaacman at the time, but the more I learned, the more intrigued I became. He is a high school dropout and business prodigy who started a payment processing company in his parents' basement in New Jersey in 1999. Today, the company is called Shift4. It is listed on the New York Stock Exchange and keeps growing like a rocket ship. 200,000 merchants use it. Isaacman is worth about $1.8 billion, they say. Isaacman has a lifelong passion for aviation. He's an accomplished pilot who owns and flies a fleet of fighters, including a MiG-29. In 2011, he and some of his pilot friends started flying air shows in tight formations, Thunderbird style. They called themselves the Black Diamond Jet Team. The next year, the team formed a company called Draken International, one of the largest private fleets of fighter aircraft in the world. The company provides adversary training for the U.S. military, professional bad guys. His passion for space came to public light in 2021 when he led the Inspiration4 mission, the first all-civilian space mission on a SpaceX Crew Dragon sitting on top of a Falcon 9. This past September, he led his second civilian flight on a Dragon-Falcon combination, this one called Polaris Dawn. It is supposed to be the first of a trilogy of missions. We'll get into that in our conversation. What we won't get into is the fact that he has been nominated to be NASA's 15th administrator. That happened on December 4th, more than a year after our conversation. What he will do with the space agency is, of course, a story yet to be told. What will happen to the Space Launch System, Artemis, the Boeing Starliner, and what about NASA's science portfolio and its crucial efforts to aim sensors at our planet to better understand the climate emergency? All of these things will come to light as Isaacman faces confirmation hearings, but our conversation does offer up some clues. So, without further ado, here's Jared Isaacman, recorded at Shift4 headquarters in Allentown, Pennsylvania, on September 25th, 2023. Are you one of those people that when you were young grew up and always wanted to be a pilot and or an astronaut?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
So I can point to two movies here. So first one is Top Gun. I think that had an impact on a lot of pilots over the last few decades. And then as a kid, I also saw The Right Stuff as well as the movie Space Camp. So that's what planted the space seed. But I think becoming a pilot felt a little bit more on the realistic trajectory that the space was going to be just a dream.
Most people, when they have a pilot Jones going on, they go get their ticket and they might make their way to the regional airlines, become an airline pilot, or they might go the military route. You didn't do either. You decided to do business first. Was that a conscious decision?
I guess it's just all priorities in life. As a kid, I loved aviation and space, and I spent a long time getting familiar with it, studying it. I built my first couple computers just to play flight simulators. I went to the aviation version of Space Camp called Aviation Challenge. And then I guess the next priority in my life was getting away from high school. I hated it. I had all these older brothers and sisters that were out living their lives, and I wanted to do the same. So left school at 16, started a company. Keeping that going became the top priority. And then I think I was about 20 years old, maybe 19. I was just waking up in the basement on my keyboard, and I just knew I needed something else in my life again, and I went right back to aviation, and that's where it began.
So you really have a passion for aviation?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about Aviation Space Camp. I'm not extremely familiar with that. Is that actually in Huntsville alongside the other space camp?
It is. First it was just Space Camp, and then they created Aviation Challenge, which is basically, instead of as a camper going through this space training mission profile, you're doing it as a fighter pilot. So you're flying flight simulators, you're doing this like really stripped down, they're putting you in a centrifuge. I even flew in a Cessna like 172. It was an awesome experience, and it's since expanded. Now they have cyber camp, robotics camp. It's actually, space camp itself has become, like, in my opinion, like a national treasure because it's exposing kids to all these experiences you couldn't get anywhere else other than Huntsville, Alabama. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's a pretty special organization. I've done some work with them in the past. Did that solidified those initial dreams then?
I think it just built on it. Honestly, when I was a kid, even before I went to Aviation Challenge, I was playing lots of flight simulators. That's why I built like a computer, was to play like Falcon 3.0 and then the Jane's flight simulators and such. That to me was just supporting the habit, if you will. But yeah, it was shortly thereafter that where I actually put it to the side for a bit because business life took over for some period.
And that business life supports the aviation habit now, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And you've got a big habit. Tell us. Wait a minute, I'm getting too far ahead of myself. This always happens to me when I start talking about aviation in space. I'm just too much of a nerd, I guess. Get excited. Before we get into his impressive aviation toy box, I do want you to hear about his experience with his first flight instructor, Philip Sniggy Adornado. And he told an interesting story about you guys are almost quickly became peers in the cockpit, really. It was an interesting scenario. An unusual instructor-student relationship, I'd say.
Oh yeah, Phil's awesome. And basically, we went on this journey together. He was a young CFI looking to build time, and obviously I was ready at this stage of my life to really lean into aviation, and it just made sense. Come work for me so that we can find time at any time, because it might be in the middle of the night, who knows, where we can fly together. And it got him a lot of exposure to things that he needed to advance his career, multi-engine, lots of instrument flying, jet aircraft, of course, and we learned together on this journey. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, he said that the initial ab initio flight with you was just a random luck of the draw moment. I said, boy, think how that has changed your life. That's one of those forks in the road.
Oh, for sure. And look, even to get where I'm in life, the ball has to bounce your way many times. And that random luck of the draw getting me an awesome flight instructor who was ready to go on this multi-decade journey with me worked out incredibly well. Could have wound up with somebody else that completely turned me off to aviation for all I know, right?
We've all flown with those instructors.
Yeah.
So walk us through your progression of aviation a little bit and how you obviously in your case, you were working so hard, it had to be wrapped up in your business. But just explain how aviation and your business progressed together.
Yeah, so I think when you find things in life that interest you and that you're reasonably decent at, you just gravitate towards it, and at least for me, you give it everything, and then you're continuing to seek out like even greater challenges associated with it. It's like the same story with business, right? I didn't start a company in my parents' basement thinking someday it would be on the New York Stock Exchange. You figure something out, you like it, and then you keep searching for that next greatest challenge, and you, parlay your experiences into something bigger, right? And that's exactly how it's gone with aviation for me too, is you start like anyone else in a single engine propeller 172 type airplane, and then you enjoy some of the more challenging aspects. You enjoy, for example, instrument flying and such, or progressing onto multi-engines. But for me, I knew very early I wanted to get into jet aircraft. And jet aircraft took me into ex-military aircraft, and that took me to airshow flying, and then Draken. And just like in business, you keep parlaying your success and experiences into something bigger, and eventually it took me to space.
How important was it for the success of your business to have an airplane at your disposal? And I assume that goes till today.
Yeah, at first it was, I would say, therapeutic as a leader, right? I needed to come into work every day and be energized about the things that we needed to conquer here at Shift4, and I got a lot of that from the time I was able to take away from the office flying. It was like a great reset and clarity, and it was a motivator too. Now, of course, there's all the productivity reasons why you do it, to be able to accomplish so much more in a day because you can fly yourself to these various locations. We did a series of M&A in 2017 where I was able to fly to 6 cities in a day and get things done. The productivity side of it for sure, but I think aviation has shaped me as a leader. There's a lot of the best practices of aviation that I've been able to bring back to my day job. A lot of our Shift4 way is about the structure and discipline of briefing and debriefing, checklist and procedure process that helps us be better and execute better here at Shift4, and a lot of that came from the aviation world.
So you've actually employed an aviation philosophy into business, or has it gone the other direction as well?
Yeah, for sure. Taking a lot from aviation and even space. Honestly, you get to spend several years inside an incredible organization like SpaceX. You're going to try and take as much of that secret formula and bring it back here. But our chief operating officer is a pilot. That's where I met him. I recognized a lot of the things that made him like a really great pilot long ago would do incredibly well here in operations. So actually, throughout the organization, you'll find a lot of pilots, you'll find a lot of ex-SpaceXers that have come into the organization. So I'd say brought a lot more aerospace into Shift4 than bringing Shift4 into aerospace.
The discipline of aviation works well in a business model, in your
For
view.
sure.
Yeah. I think one of the things about when you get in the aviation world is you meet, it self-selects an amazingly good group of people. Wouldn't you agree on that?
I do. I agree. Yeah. Flying in air shows in 2011, essentially that air show team, we were doing formation aerobatics, all of us became the co-founders of a business together, which was Draken International, which was a whole new idea to like basically outsource turnkey fighter jets as professional adversaries or professional bad guys. For the military. Those same people that I'm very close with today are supporting our work on the Polaris program with SpaceX. So no question, met incredible individuals throughout my aviation career, and they've found their way into Shift4 or other endeavors that we've worked on.
So when you're flying in tight formation like that, a matter of inches away from somebody else's wingtip, and you're flying with former Thunderbirds guys, most of the people in that formation would have learned all that in the military. You came in a completely different way. Did you find they were a little skeptical at first?
I'm sure they were. I'm sure Stroker and Slick would say that the first, the kind of early days before we really started flying together, there was probably some healthy skepticism, not just about me, but also Doug Demko, who is the other civilian background pilot on the team. I don't think it took long after flying together that they had the right confidence in us. We were lucky because actually long before we were doing formation aerobatics, we were flying with extraordinary aviators like Dale Snort Snodgrass, one of the best. We had flown with him for a couple years before the airshow teams. And Jerry Jive Kirby, another great example. We had some awesome mentors long before we decided to bring 7 aircraft in close proximity to each other. And hopefully the rest of the team saw that pretty early on, and that's why we had a great airshow career together.
Did you ever have any moments where you felt like, I don't belong here?
For sure. In the early days, when we were training actually up here in Pennsylvania, near Pottsville, Pennsylvania, and then down in St. Augustine, call it our training season, you knew you were flying with the best of the best, for sure. And I was very quick in some of the first debriefs, like, hey, guys, I'm just happy to be here. Kick me out at any time, and I'm going to enjoy hell watching you guys fly. Always wanted to give them an out if they felt that that we weren't able to make the cut. Fortunately, they never had to take that out. So,
I suspect if they felt you couldn't make the cut, you would have heard one way or another. Those guys don't mess around. And you were your handle is Rook.
Because that's my name.
Never explained your call sign, right? It's not for rookie, is it? You can't say. I understood. All right, tell me about the transition to the space flight. Was that always part of your trajectory plan, or was there a moment where you're like, wait a minute, I could buy myself a seat or a capsule and go into orbit? How did this all transpire?
No, again, like ball's got to bounce your way so many times. Stars have to align to have that, 1 in a billion opportunity to be able to lead the first civilian mission to orbit. So there's no way that you could ever say that there was like a plan for that to happen. It was in 2008. 2009, that Doug Demko and myself, we did some around the world record flights, and we did it because of the challenge and also to raise funds for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And when we came back from that, I got an invitation from a lot of folks that were the founders of the commercial space industry to go to Baikonur in Kazakhstan and see the Soyuz launch. And this was the end of 2008. So it's, of course I'm going to go. Who's going to pass up an opportunity like that? And when I was there, I came away, not only was it extraordinary to see a launch in Kazakhstan, they let you see it, you're like a par 3 away from the rocket. It's pretty awesome. I came away from that trip saying, you know what, maybe it's possible. And I had some conversations with SpaceX then. There's like a A document in the archives of the first opportunity to pilot Dragon was discussed in '08 for an expected launch date in 2011. So it turned out to be a little bit more down the road, but I had honestly forgot about it for so long. I was just just cheering SpaceX on from the sidelines. And then in October of 2020, before even NASA's Crew 1 launched, conversations began that ultimately led to Inspiration4. And I couldn't have predicted that a month before those conversations that it would happen.
But you weren't going to say no.
There was zero chance of that.
So tell me about you. This opportunity gets presented before you. And I think if you look at the history of the pejorative would be space tourism, but we'll call it space participants, they've been pretty individual efforts. And you had the opportunity to go with your bros, your friends, right, or whatever. And instead, you broadened it out to a bunch of people you didn't even know. What were you thinking at the time?
When I found out, because for all I knew, the offer was going to be the 12th mission or the 15th mission. It seems fair that they'd want to get a few NASA missions under their belt first, right? And when I found out it was going to be the first and how quickly it was going to come to be, I just knew that was going to come with a lot of responsibility and that we had to get it right. That really comes down to just doing the right thing. It is going to take a lot more than what Elon and all of that SpaceX brain power and talent can do to put humans on Mars. It's more than just the hardware and the software. You have to have people that are willing to believe in it all, that it's okay that we should do this, that it's all right to make progress in space for tomorrow, and we won't ignore everything that's wrong here on Earth too along the way. And if you recognize that, how important that's going to be towards achieving this broader vision, then it should have been obvious right from the get-go that this isn't going to be a bunch of your friends, that you're going to have to assemble a very inspiring crew that each have their own audience. And maybe it has nothing to do with spaceflight at all. It's just people that have an amazing story, never giving up, or hope in the bleakest of moments in life, right? Or service and generosity, like in the case of Chris Zembrowski. You knew you were going to need a very inspiring crew, and you knew that it had to serve a bigger purpose than the mission itself, and that's where St Jude Children's Research Hospital came into it all. And these were going to be just vitally important. If you believe that SpaceX's vision could become a reality, then this first mission had to be handled a very certain way, and that's what we tried to do.
Lay out for those who don't know or forgot how each seat represented some sort of ideal.
Yeah, the four mission pillars were hope, generosity, prosperity, and leadership. And for hope, from the get-go, we knew we were going to take a frontline healthcare professional from St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which was the charity that we were going to work with on this vision. Because if you think about the kind of players involved, SpaceX has this incredible vision of making life multiplanetary because the world's a more interesting place when you can journey among the stars. St. Jude has a very powerful vision too, which is that no child should ever die in the dawn of life. So two really incredible visions that you get to support in this. So we knew that from the start, and we wanted a healthcare professional from St. Jude, and St. Jude went through a selection process on their end, and that's where Haley Arsenault came from. And not only her talents to actually contribute to the mission as a medical officer were flawless, she was a childhood cancer survivor. And as a result, if you're thinking about hope, she overcame those horrific circumstances early in life, lived her dream to become a St. Jude medical professional, became the youngest American to go into orbit, the first with a prosthesis. There's a lot of hope in that story right there. Dr. Cyan Proctor, she represented prosperity. She's a person that never gave up in life. She literally did everything she could to be a NASA astronaut, and she made it to the final selection round and came up short. She's a Civil Air Patrol major, she's a pilot, scuba instructor, PhD geoscientist. She literally tried to build the expertise and everything necessary to be a successful astronaut and came up this close and never gave up, right? And through her talents in poetry and arts, she got selected to represent the prosperity pillar and then Chris Zembrowski on generosity. Air Force veteran, worked on some of the biggest rockets in the military arsenal, was a space camp counselor. He made just a donation to St. Jude, $50 donation type deal, knowing that, he had a 1 in a million chance or something, but regardless, it was going to a good cause. And he actually wasn't selected. His friend was selected, And then furthering that spirit of generosity, chose to give his seat to Chris Zimbrowski. So just awesome stories, great individuals, and they did their job incredibly well on the mission.
So you took 4 of you, all strangers, right?
Yep.
Each of you with an interesting backstory on their own right. And you managed to turn that successfully into a crew, into a family, which says a little bit about your leadership style. Was there something conscious you did to make that happen, or does that just come naturally to you?
I think we worked really hard together as a team to become a crew that was ready for human spaceflight. So I tried to set expectations very early on that we had to earn this every step of the way. We are not Top Gun, we are not the best of the best, and that is the first time really in the history of human spaceflight where that wasn't the case, that we weren't the most highly screened individuals getting this incredible honor and opportunity to see Earth from another vantage point, right? We have to earn it every step of the way because there's going to be a lot of people that are rooting for us not to succeed. From the time we're showing up in the morning, we're early, we're briefing, we're debriefing, we're going to have a lot of structure in our life. We're going to learn from everything we get wrong, and we're going to share everything we got right and the successes associated with it. And we had 6 months of very concentrated time together to figure out how to become a crew that under stressful circumstances can still persevere and be happy, healthy, and productive. And that's what we were throughout our mission. So
it's risky, though, to bring strangers together and turn that into a crew that's in such a dynamic and risky environment.
Totally. Yeah, and look, SpaceX, there is still a screening process, right? SpaceX, for all the doors that they are opening, they are still leveraging 60 years of NASA's lessons learned, right? There is still a health screening process. I would say though, instead of looking for reasons to say no, they're looking for reasons to say yes, because they do envision a future with millions of people in space. There's still a psychological screening component to it. And there were a lot as part of the Inspiration4 crew selection process where a lot of people were eliminated from that through SpaceX's screening. Yeah, there is a lot of ways that things can go wrong, as we know, throughout human spaceflight in a spaceship. You're on a controlled explosion going 17,500 miles an hour into orbit. That's a lot of energy to put into an object, and then you have to take it all out to come home. There's a lot that goes into that has to be done correctly. Yeah, incredible crew. There is a lot of risk that goes into human spaceflight, but SpaceX did their job on screening and training, and we did our job when we came together during the training process to become a crew as well.
I'm sure over the course of the training you had a long list of challenges, but does anything stand at the top of the list as the biggest challenge you faced bringing this crew together and making this a success? For
sure. I think that our climb on Mount Rainier was definitely a huge moment. I'm sure that when I look back to some of the challenges we had on orbit, because there's no flawless mission. There's space adaptation syndrome. About 50% of astronauts feel really horrible for a period of time. There's nothing you can do really in advance of it. It's treatment on orbit, and it takes you out of commission for a bit, which puts a big burden on the rest of the crew. We had that. We had it with half our crew. We had another crew member with a different illness. We had system issues on our spacecraft, including the worst alarm you could get in space. And we pushed through all of that and got everything we intended to get done and then some. And if I look back on that success, I would point to getting to our first Camp Muir on Rainier as like a key moment in our training program. Haley, with a prosthesis in her leg, she had avoided her whole adult life, anything that could put that in jeopardy. I didn't know until after the fact when she told me that she had actually broken it multiple times. Didn't want to share it because didn't want to be excluded from that really challenging climb. She pushed through those very difficult circumstances knowing that one fall could take her out of the mission, right? You had people that you normally train for a good 6 months. They had 30 days from when they were selected for this to get ready to go and do it. And they all got there, and they weren't healthy when they got there. It took every bit out of them, right? But they knew where their limits were, and if they pushed through, they could get to it. And I think they probably all look back and say that was one of the moments that they drew on as kind of inspiration when things got tough in space.
What's the worst alarm you can get in space?
It would be a fire alarm.
You got a fire alarm. How did that go down?
So fortunately, it wasn't a fire. We have 3 optical sensors that detect particulates in the air that would be an indication of a fire. One of them went off, and the other 2 were trending towards their limits, which actually would trigger, if you trip 2, it's at that point a confirmed event, and it would trigger a lot of protective actions in the vehicle, and it's So it's obviously not something you want. It turned out it was actually another component that was actually related to the toilet system that had failed, and it was coming apart. It was a fan system, and that was introducing the particulates. Now, you don't want any overheating fan because that is very likely a source, like an ignition source. So in the end, it was the warning you don't want to have, and it triggered a lot of work for us, but we were able to isolate what the problem was. And it did mean a pretty important system on the spacecraft was inoperative for a couple days. But again, like I said, you look back to that climb on the mountain where you're uncomfortable, you're cold, the food's no good, it's not like you have a great bathroom situation there either, and you push through and you become happy and healthy and productive again. That's exactly what we drew upon when we were in space.
So you had a couple of days without an operative toilet in space. How did you get through that?
The same way astronauts have been doing it for 60 years. It's actually, that's a system that has not had a lot of success on the shuttle or the space station. So there's a lot of good alternatives that have worked out over time.
Would you say your mission, the Inspiration4 mission, would you say it was an inflection point in the history of space? If you could look at Dennis Tito's, the first space participant, and you could look at the other ones as being somewhat similar. And then this one seemed different because of the way you brought in what you might call average individuals, although they weren't what's an average individual. But you did bring in a collection of people who didn't necessarily have the wherewithal to write a check and who represented other things. In your view, is that a historical moment?
I think Inspiration4 was an important moment. Look, we were totally standing on the shoulders of giants, right? There was so many key milestones through all of human spaceflight that were vastly, I think, more important than what we contribute with Inspiration4. But I do think, again, it was important for a couple reasons. You had an all-rookie crew that didn't know each other 6 months before the mission, that weren't training their whole lives to become astronauts, that went into orbit for several days, and again, were very happy, healthy, productive, and got the job done. And that's important if you do believe in SpaceX's vision that we are going to make life multiplanetary, and that there will be this Jetson world where you have thousands of spaceships. Geez, they're building 2 factories to make starships like they're making Teslas. That's pretty awesome. There had to be a first. Somebody had to open the door to say this could be done, and you don't just have to be one of those exceptionally lucky few that were essentially lucky enough to get struck by lightning to become NASA astronauts. And I think also it was a different approach of, again, from a health medical screening of like, how do we find ways to get people on this mission versus using it as a way to narrow 1 million applicants down to just a handful, right? And then the charitable component, I think, is so important because so many people around the world have this kind of binary view of space, which is it's either burn the planet, it's already destroyed, time to move on to Mars, where the wealthy will build their new community. Or it's forget all about progress. We have to focus on every problem we have here on Earth, and only after every problem is solved are we ready to move on to the next journey, right? And it's neither one of those is reasonable, right? It's got to be a balance of both. And I think Inspiration4 struck that proper balance because a big part of the mission had nothing to do with space. It had to do with kids that got dealt an incredibly horrible hand in life and how we can make their lives better so kids can grow up and really enjoy this exciting future that we're trying to build. I do think for a lot of reasons it was important, but there were obviously far more historic and in key moments in human spaceflight history.
It's on the timeline, I think, for sure. How much money were you able to raise for St. Jude by leveraging the attention surrounding this mission?
Yeah, over $250 million.
That's a pretty historic fundraising campaign, isn't it?
It is. It was certainly the largest fundraising campaign in St. Jude Children's Research Hospital history. And everybody got to play a part in it. Some people look and say, why didn't just Jared and Elon just write the whole check? And we both did write very big checks, but there's millions of people that may not have known about St. Jude's mission at all that now do and care. And that actually goes right to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital's founder, Danny Thomas, who said, I'd rather have 1 million people that wrote a dollar check than one person who wrote $1 million check, right? So I think it worked out quite well, and I do think it's making a difference at St. Jude.
So let's talk a little bit about what's ahead with Polaris and onward.
So I actually thought there were talks before Inspiration4 had flown about what could come next. And then after splashdown, and Elon made that final donation that put us well over the goal, right? It was like, okay, this is pretty good mission complete here. Everything we set out to do, we got done and then some. The bar is pretty high now. Let's sit back and watch all the exciting missions to come. And I was very content ending at that point. But did go to Starbase, Texas in October, so about a month after we came back, and sat down with Elon and some of his leaders there and outlined everything from where we ended with Inspiration4 to where SpaceX wants to go with Starship. And there's a lot that needs to get done in between. It will take many years to get to Starship's full end-to-end capability being proven. We've never had a fully reusable first and second stage. Starship in itself, more than double the thrust of the Saturn V, more habitable volume in one Starship than the entirety of the International Space Station. That's ambitious, right? Do we want to wait 10 years to learn a lot of lessons, or can we start to figure some things out now and leverage Falcon and Dragon to do it? Elon set the biggest objectives for Polaris Dawn. We got to go really high. Let's go right to the inner portions of the Van Allen radiation belt, and let's start learning about an environment we haven't been to in 50 years. Because we're gonna need to know it from a human physiology perspective. We need to know it from a vehicle architecture perspective. Dragon specifically is not a radiation hardened vehicle. It's designed with like multiple layers of redundancy so that it can accept some failures gracefully. Is that the right approach when we go venture out back to the moon or to Mars? So there's a high altitude component of getting outside our comfort zone, which is important. We're gonna test a brand new spacesuit and do a spacewalk. So we'll vent the entire capsule down to vacuum. 2 of us will support the astronauts from inside the vehicle, and 2 will go outside the vehicle. And why is that important? Because if we're going to go to the moon or Mars, we're going to probably want to get outside our spaceship to either explore or construct or do things. And the current spacesuits we've had now for 40 years, they're very old, and they literally cost hundreds of millions of dollars. There's nothing scalable about that. Versus SpaceX applying the same, innovative mindset that created reusable rockets to spacesuits is very important. And we will test that out as our second objective. Third, we're going to communicate over the Starlink constellation using laser links. That's important. When Inspiration4 flew, it was the first time in human spaceflight history that there were humans in orbit and they weren't the highest priority from a national communication asset perspective. It's always been that way. Everything else is on pause, and we're going to prioritize all our satellites and ground stations to communication. We had 80% comm coverage on Inspiration4 because we weren't the highest priority, and that's totally fine. But that was only 14 people in orbit. What happens when you have 140 or 1,000 people? We're going to use up this bandwidth pretty quick. So having thousands of Starlinks in orbit with lasers is going to allow us to communicate to armadas of starships and people on the moon and maybe on Mars someday. So that's our third objective, and then over 5 days we have a pretty packed science and research schedule, and that's Polaris Dawn, and that's going to launch beginning of next year.
On September 10th, 2024, almost exactly a year after we spoke, the Polaris Dawn crew launched on a Dragon capsule on top of a Falcon 9 rocket from the Kennedy Space Center. Isaacman, the mission commander, was joined by pilot Scott Kidd Poteet, an experienced Air Force fighter pilot, and 2 SpaceX lead operations engineers, mission specialists Sarah Gillis and Anna Menon. The mission achieved a record-breaking orbit, reaching 870 miles, 1,400 kilometers above Earth. That's the highest since the Apollo era. Isaacman and Gillis conducted the first ever commercial spacewalk, testing new SpaceX spacesuits. Although, when you think about it, since there wasn't an airlock and all the air was vented out of the Crew Dragon capsule, you could make the argument that all 4 of them logged an EVA. They did successfully test the Starlink system as a means of communicating in space, and they performed over 40 other experiments to advance human health and space exploration. After 5 days, the Crew Dragon capsule safely splashed down in the Gulf of Mexico. It was an ambitious and successful civilian spaceflight, another important milestone. This is way beyond space participation or space tourism, whatever you want to call it. This is actually testing important technology that will, and it's you and some civilians. What are your thoughts on that kind of partnership that's evolved here?
Inspiration4 was 6 months of training to fly the same spaceship that NASA astronauts use to go to the International Space Station. Our education, training, simulator testing were to the same standards as NASA, because if something goes wrong, you have to be able to come home. So to me, the whole space tourism thing was invented just to lock in the glory of the early space pioneers, which is fair to some extent, but it would be like saying, if we're going to compare an F-22 pilot to Orville Wright, this is a pilot, this is a video game operator, because that thing is flying itself up around. We don't do that, right? Golfer who goes out with the giant Big Bertha head is the same as the golfer that swung the wooden head. It's progress, right? So to me, I think this will solve itself as you have thousands of starships someday and we're actually begin to explore our solar system. I don't think we'll be as hung up necessarily on the pioneers of the right stuff era versus the pioneers of today. But all that said, there's no question, Polaris program is a research and development program. It's a commercial research and development program in partnership with SpaceX to either test out brand new technology or test things that we haven't done in 50 years, all with the aim of opening up space for everyone. It's incredibly exciting. Just feel really fortunate to basically be a fly on the wall for what SpaceX is doing.
Did you ever imagine that you would be in the position of flying a mission like this, where you're really on the pushing the envelope of space technology?
No, I couldn't have even imagined Inspiration4, right? Again, the stars have to align for something that extraordinary to happen. But I did feel coming back from Inspiration4 and after going to Starbase Texas and meeting with Elon and the team, this was my kind of thing. This is, just like I said in the beginning of the start of my aviation career, you're always seeking out greater challenges and parlaying your experience and expertise into that next great endeavor. It's what I've done throughout my business career, and it's exactly what the Polaris program is coming off I-4.
So you're legendary as a hard worker. How are you doing all of this?
You just eat into that sleep time, right? Just less sleep.
Yeah, there are more missions in the pipeline, right?
Polaris Dawn is the first of the Polaris program. The third mission, which for now is just Polaris 3, will be the first crewed flight of Starship. So that'll be the first end test off the super heavy booster, so fully reusable vehicle. When that goes well, you've got the 737 in human space flight, and you've got the factories already making just what could be thousands of them. So that is super cool. But again, it's going to take a while to get to that point. There's a lot of tests that needs to be done. There's only been one orbital test flight, and they learned a lot, but long way to go there. And then the middle mission after Polaris Dawn, which is Polaris 2, was always meant to build off of what we learned on Polaris Dawn that gets us that much closer to Starship. So I think people know we proposed a mission to NASA to rendezvous with Hubble, to boost it, to enhance its capabilities, and then we'll detach from it and do some other things before coming home. Very logical coming off Polaris Dawn, because Polaris Dawn, if that's successful, we will have proven out our EVA capabilities. And look, I think it's another awesome example of what commercial space can do for here on Earth. Having the greatest exploration asset in human history, which is Hubble, operate alongside James Webb, gives us the potential to unlock so many mysteries of our universe. It's so incredible to think about that. Not to mention it's a great demonstration of capabilities. So we're certainly hopeful that NASA takes us up on that free option, but we'll see. If not, we have plenty of other things we can do on the second mission.
So you could go in the space footsteps of John Grunsfeld and be fixing the Hubble, in theory.
Again, no comparison to all the early pioneers that had very tough jobs, especially as it relates to Hubble, but we'd love to be able to keep it going for a little bit longer. We could give it easily 10 more years of life. And what I've told guys like even John Grunsfeld on that is that if we can push that thing up, give it 10 more years of life and capabilities, great for science, but by that point, you could have, again, armadas of starships that are so inexpensive to operate, we could have it go up, retrieve Hubble, bring it back to Earth and put it in the Smithsonian. How incredible would that be to have that amazing exploration asset that would have spent decades in space back here on Earth where everyone could go and see it?
Before Columbia, Ed Weiler at NASA wanted to do that. He was proposing a mission to use a shuttle to bring it back. It'd be great to bring it back. It'd be fabulous.
Completely agree.
Do you plan on being on all these missions?
That's the plan right now.
Help me understand, and I don't know how much you're sharing on this, but are you writing checks for all this? Do you have a partnership? What is happening here?
There is no anticipated revenue associated with the Polaris program, right? Actually, folks have reached out from test pilot schools and other commercial astronaut programs to help with training, and we're happy to do that. Really, this is just making a contribution towards SpaceX's bigger vision. It is a partnership. SpaceX contributes an awful lot into the program. I contribute into the program as well. SpaceX has the loudest voice in the room, so I say, look, I'd love to be flying on every one of those missions. SpaceX has a pretty big say in every one of these too.
But essentially what you're doing is you individually are funding a large part of this new vision for civilian space. How do you feel about that?
I think that all of the heavy lifting is being done by those at NASA, at SpaceX, all the contractors contributing into it, everybody who's learned all of this over the last 60 years. I feel like this is a chance to contribute in a very small way into the history they're trying to make.
But we are at a point now when civilian space is becoming very real in a way it hasn't. Just in the last few years, it's really changed, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think this is inevitable though, right? You don't have the FAA is not building every airplane and hiring and training every pilot. Not every pilot came from the Air Force, not every diver came from the Navy, not every helicopter pilot came from the Army, right? You look to the government at first because they have the financial means and the expertise to unlock these new frontiers, but for them to really take off, you have to open it up for commercial purposes, and that's where the real innovation takes place. And for more than 60 years now, space has been the exclusive domain of the few. Really, just 3 superpowers have actually done it organically: the US, Russia, and China. And it can't stay that way forever. There's so much space out there, so little we know. Whether it's, again, just part of our DNA to want to go out and explore and try and find answers to questions we've been thinking about a while, whether it's for national security reasons or even entrepreneurship. Who knows what we might find? Maybe we're 3D printing organs in space. Maybe we unlock a new form of energy in helium-3. Who knows? But I know that it can't happen if it stays the lucky 12 every 4 years, right? It's got to be opened up to the many. That's SpaceX's vision, and whether it's commercial space or civilian space, it's the final frontier, and its time has come.
There's a lot of people that say that. You're putting your money where your mouth is. Do you share how much you're investing in all of this?
No, I don't think I've shared exactly how much, but I'd say really lucky. I've signed the giving pledge, and I'm choosing to give away the resources I've accumulated to awesome organizations like St Jude Children's Research Hospital and assisting in SpaceX's unbelievable vision to make life multiplanetary.
If there wasn't somebody like you, who would do all these things, I guess is the question.
That's what's so exciting about commercial space right now, is that it is being opened up to more. People still, I think, look at times like it's just for the super wealthy, but actually it's not true. You have now other sovereign nations that are putting their astronauts into orbit, whether it's via Axiom and SpaceX, that otherwise wouldn't. Space is opening. The more willing people you have, whether it's from, again, a government nation, a military, a commercial organization, it's only a matter of time as more demand comes to this and costs go down with pioneering technology like reusable rockets, that it will open up to many. And then when that happens, there's more experimentation that takes place, things you couldn't otherwise afford to do. And again, whether it's biomedical or in energy, or who knows when you think about it, right? It will happen. I think the difference is that I'm able to contribute in ways that don't have to have any real economic benefit right away. It could simply just be about testing out technologies that others will need at some point. Again, whether it's new spacesuits or flying at higher altitudes or testing new communication methods or even just the science and research we're doing. If you ask me, this is all going to happen at some point in time or another. I think that Polaris specifically is able to focus on a track that I think serves to the benefit of everybody else.
While we were finishing up the interview, Jared's wife, Monica, whom he met in middle school in New Jersey, came in with their 2 young daughters, Mila and Liv. The girls are super cute and extremely polite. You can tell they're getting some good parenting. Seeing this perfect family assembled in front of me brought me back to the time when I was poised to fly on the space shuttle to the International Space Station. At that time, my kids were about the same age, elementary school. It does make you think twice. There are 3 people in this room who get to weigh in on this question, but is it all worth the risk?
I think so, for sure. I've tried to live my life by a couple philosophies, one of which is you are not fulfilling your purpose if you don't maximize the opportunities that you find along this journey. Like, I have opportunities to participate in something that I think is quite extraordinary, and I don't think I'd be fulfilling my purpose if I didn't do it. And then also, like, you have to, throughout this very short existence we have, you have to leave Earth in a better place than you found it. And I get to do both with the Polaris program. I think that's worth it.
Jared Isaacman, high school dropout, entrepreneurial prodigy, passionate aviator, pioneering civilian spacefarer, and now, at 41, the youngest person to be nominated NASA administrator. Just barely. Trump's first NASA boss, Jim Bridenstine, was 42 when he was nominated in September of 2017. Isaacman is poised to succeed the oldest man to hold the title, Bill Nelson, who is now 82. So we are now facing a tectonic generational shift at NASA, from silent to millennial, but also from old space to new, from shuttle to Dragon, from SLS to Starship. And given Elon Musk's close connections to both Trump and Isaacman, maybe from the moon to Mars. It's a fascinating choice for NASA. But can Isaacman muster all of his passion and entrepreneurial talent to move the needle at a bureaucracy with a $25 billion budget and more than 18,000 employees at 10 centers across the country? There are many members of Congress, many in red districts, who see space as little more than a jobs program for their constituents. There's an awful lot of inertia to keep things just as they are. It's enough to make the rocket science look easy. Thanks for listening. I'm Miles O'Brien. I'd be very appreciative if you'd leave a comment. And if you like what you hear, tell your friends about Miles to Go. Until next time, blue skies.